All right, great. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How about yourself?
Not bad. Let's see here. So, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, no problem.
Second chime's a charm.
Exactly.
Um, I guess basically like we just we did before. Just kind of go over what your journey and what you're doing and you mentioned the dead Kennedys before, so talk about that if you want to.
Okay. That's pretty broad. What would you like to talk about first?
Well, I mean, what are you into? What do you do?
Well, I'm a psychologist. That's what I do for my profession. So I was trained as a neuropsychologist, and neuropsychologist really deals with brain behavior relationships. So earlier in my career, I worked a lot with people who had brain injury, strokes, things like that. I was really interested in rehabilitation work. Um, but I've always, even before that, I think I always wanted to be a therapist. I just went this roundabout sort of way to it. Um, so earlier in my career, I worked a lot with people who had organic brain injury, people with psychiatric illness, both inpatient and outpatient, and worked in skilled nursing facilities. And then in the past 10 years or so, I've been in private practice, and also learned trauma informed therapy. There's a lot of most people think of therapy as talk therapy, but a lot of times when people just use talk therapy and they've had real trauma like post-traumatic stress disorder, they don't really respond all that well to it, because trauma is locked in the body. So a lot of the work I do now is related to that. There's a type of therapy called EMDR, which is actually a pretty popular kind of therapy for trauma. It's been around since like the late 1980s. And it really kind of deals with the fact that trauma does get locked in the body and we have to sort of shift gears, because usually what happens is when something difficult happens to us, we're able to just sort of process it. It's upsetting at first, but then we process it, and somehow it sort of gets locked where it's not really being processed. Um, so yeah, one of the things about that is it's, there's a model for it, but I wasn't really clear about, how that type of memory is different. So one of the things, again, this has become popular over the past 5 years or so, is something called polyvagal theory, which talks about the different states of your nervous system in terms of survival responses. So do you want me to talk a little bit about that, I
Sure,
guess? Okay.
sure.
So basically we have three modes of survival. And I always, when I explain this to clients, I always tell them like a dumb kind of story, which I will do here. And basically, if you imagine that you're walking with a friend of yours and you're walking through like a beautiful forest, and it's a gorgeous day and you're listening to the wind go through the trees and it's very peaceful. Usually you'll feel that in your body, that sense of peace and connection. You're calm. You're really enjoying things that are around you. Your thinking skills are clear. If you're with a friend, you can really connect with that friend. And what's going on is your long-term body functions, the things that keep you alive in the long term, like your digestion, your immune system functioning, your sleep-wake cycles, that sort of stuff is functioning most optimally. It's all the stuff that keeps you alive for the long haul. And then what happens is if you're walking along and you see a bear, everything changes, right? So if we're at this state, I'm going to call this the tend, befriend, rest, digest state, the one we just talked about. But if you see a bear, your body switches into a different gear, where you go into fight flight response, right? Where your heart races, your breathing becomes faster and more shallow. And you just become very reactive, right? All of your long-term functions just kind of shut down. So your digestion shuts down, which is why sometimes when people are nervous, they'll, get stomach aches, or when people get nervous, their mouth will get dry. Your immune system functioning doesn't work as well, which is why when people go through a period of stress, they might get sick, right? But basically, your heart races, your breathing's faster, your muscles get tight because you're going to usually run away from that bear that you see there, or you'll fight it, which most people won't. But anyway, that's what your body does, right? And then when you go to safety, you'll go back into that original state. However, if you're running and the bear managed to catch up to you and goes to maul you, everything shifts. So instead of everything being heightened, everything sort of decreases. Your heart rate decreases, your breathing slows down, your ability to sense what's going on around you decreases. So sometimes people will feel like they're looking at things through a fog or like a tunnel, or people will hear ringing in their ears, or there'll be this sense that things around them are not real. And this is kind of a dissociative response, or sometimes like a depressive response. When people feel depressed, everything typically feels slowed down as well. So basically what happens is when you have a traumatic memory, what happens is, okay, you're okay there? What's going on? Everything okay? Now you're frozen. Okay. Now it says it's uploading the recordings. It looks like it's still recording, but I think I'm the only one who's here. Okay. Bear with me. Okay. Okay. Is this still going? I think it is. Sean, we're missing you. It looks like it's still recording. This is so strange. This is like, there's like 2 minutes of me just talking to myself, which is not unusual. I talk to myself sometimes. Ex- Oh, here we
Sorry,
go. That's
sorry, my
okay.
phone died.
Okay.
All right, we're still recording. Good.
Oh, we're recording. We're starting to record, Ben.
Well, we're recording. It's never stopped. So
Oh, it never
we're good.
stopped.
Never
Okay,
stopped.
great. So what are you going to do? Are you going to edit this later?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, got it.
I'll just merge everything together. So
Okay. All right. So we're talking about that last response, which is more depressive and dissociative. That's freeze, collapse, shutdown response. So what
okay.
happens is when people have a traumatic memory, they have this response in their body, and that memory is linked to one of those responses: fight, flight, or freeze, collapse, shutdown. And then basically, lots of times when people look at themselves as having anxiety or anger, which is what comes up in fight, flight, or they look at themselves as having depression, um, we look at it as something we kind of want to get rid of. But in reality, these are adaptive, these keep us surviving. But what happens is when we do almost any type of therapy, what we're doing is we're bringing this tend and befriend body response online where people feel calm, right, and connected.
Mhm.
And then we bring up wherever this traumatic memory is in their autonomic nervous system. So when the body feels like it's in safety and we bring up things that feel unsafe, then it can reprocess the memory. And that's, I think, how almost any therapy works. At its core is that sense of connection and safety, and then bringing up things that are difficult in that context, and then things feel safer. Sometimes it's by talking with their connection with your therapist, and then things feel safer. Sometimes it's more of these body related types of therapies, like EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, like stimulating both sides of the body. That can be by eye movements or tapping. But it's something that creates a sense of safety. And in that context of safety, it shifts.
Nice.
So that was a mouthful.
No, it's important. I think.
Yeah. And
I
it's kind of
think.
cool. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just say. I think this is interesting and important to talk about. So go ahead and tell me what you're going to say.
Oh, I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. I think one of the big things about it, as I said before, is that so often we look at these emotional responses that we have as something bad, something we want to get rid of. So people can say, you know, why am I anxious all the time? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, I want to get rid of the anxiety. And the nice reframe for them is, no, it's a good thing you have anxiety. You want to have some anxiety. You might just be having a little bit more of it than you need to have. But then you can use sort of strategies to help. When you understand what happens in the body, you can use strategies to sort of shift it. And they're really simple. So, for example, if you're having a lot of anxiety, and we know in that state, your heart races, your breathing is fast or shallow, and your muscles are tightened, you could use any strategy to reverse that, and it reverses the anxiety. It helps you to shift gears, or anything that gives you a sense of safety. When we go into that freeze, collapse, shutdown, or more of that dissociative or depressive response, there's a disconnection from the body. So anything that reconnects you back in the body is going to be something that helps you to shift out of that state a bit.
Nice. What do you think of therapy using psilocybin or like acid or LSD?
Yeah, so I don't know a lot about those, but my understanding is that using those and in the presence of a therapist who kind of contains it, almost like a spotter, you're actually helping to elicit this state. You're helping to elicit this state of safety. You're helping to create this great sort of interconnection within the body. And in that presence, then these other things that come up that are difficult will tend to shift. I mean,
Nice.
that would be my blanket understanding of pretty much everything in terms of anything therapeutic.
Nice.
So, yeah, there's a biology that goes to it where we call it polyvagal theory because it's based on Stephen Porges is a neuroscientist who came up with this like in the 1990s. And there's the 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve or the wandering nerve. And there's basically two branches of it. This ventral vagal nerve, ventral is like the front part of the body. So what it does is it sort of connects all of the aspects of the brain, especially the higher parts of the brain, your frontal lobes, all of the lobes, and it connects it with the organs of the body. So your heart, your lungs, your stomach, your upper digestive tract, basically most of your organs that are above your diaphragm. And this is where it'll cause that sort of slowed heart rate. You could sort of pick up on what other people are feeling and almost feel the exact same emotions, but recognize that they're the emotions of the other person. They're not your emotions. You think most clearly, problem solve best in this state. And then the other part of it is this dorsal vagal state, which is like this older sort of state where the vagus nerve connects mostly to the brain stem down to the organs below the diaphragm, your bladder and bowels. I mean, it connects other places too, but generally when that happens, there's that sort of shutdown response. So both of these actually slow your autonomic nervous system. This does it in more of a relaxed state. This is more of an emergency shutdown state, like when you're in imminent danger. And this is that heightened part of that response in your autonomic nervous system.
Nice.
So it's kind of the biology of it.
Right. Where are you based out of?
I'm in New York, actually.
And let's see, where did you study?
So I realized probably when I got my private practice and I was hanging up my diplomas that I've been in public school my whole life. So I just went to State University of New York at Binghamton for undergraduate, and my graduate studies were at City University of New York.
Nice.
They have a huge psychology department. They have a whole bunch of different campuses. So the campus that I went to housed their neuropsychology program. And really a lot of the therapy stuff I got was through externships and internships, like working in the field, because mostly that program focuses on neuropsych assessment, brain-related issues, things like that. So most of my training was in rehab settings. Like I said before, like inpatient and outpatient brain injury rehabilitation settings, like in hospitals and outpatient programs, and psychiatric inpatient and outpatient programs too.
Nice.
So yeah, like, not so much day treatment programs, but there was a rehabilitation program for people with psychiatric illness that would make it so that if they wanted to live independently or work independently, that it would kind of help them to get the resources that they needed and the skill set that they needed, and kind of help them on their way with that. It was a pretty great program. Getting people into work and stuff like that, and education and living on their own. And and also psychiatric inpatient as well. I briefly did a program for people who are military service personnel. It was an inpatient psychiatric program, but I would go there just to do neuropsych assessments, because what they wanted to figure out with these folks was whether they actually had any sort of brain injury from like those intermittent explosive devices.
Right.
Because when you have all those loud sound, it kind of causes the brain to reverberate and actually cause damage. It's a little tricky.
Right.
A lot of them had a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, which makes it harder for you to do the testing. And it impacts cognitive functioning too. But
nice.
thanks.
I mean, that's horrible, but that's
it's horrible,
great.
but it was a useful service.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Like, I learned a while ago that basically your DNA is like the map to you, but then it's also, it's kind of a map to your ancestry and, a lot of different things. And I also heard that, you can, through your DNA, you can adapt some of your your family's trauma.
I heard about that, and I'm not entirely sure how that works, to be very honest. Perhaps, if there are structural changes in the DNA, I'm guessing, if there's structural changes in the DNA, there's this thing called epigenetics. So it's not just the genetics that you have, but how they're expressed. So perhaps certain genes are expressed at different times. And I'm wondering if that impacts, like your ancestors if they had trauma before their reproductive age, if it would make it so that the genes that you get would be different if they weren't. And I'm just guessing because I don't know, to be very honest. But definitely your gene expression changes a lot, based on your environment, based on a lot of different things.
Like, for instance, my great-grandfather left Ireland during the potato famine. And so I'm just curious if, like, I'm sure that's it's a traumatizing situation. You're fleeing the country because of starvation and British, authoritarianism, and it's just wondering if that can rub off, or if you're black and, like if you're African American and your ancestors came over during slavery, or any traumatizing situation if you're Jewish and the Holocaust and all that. So I always thought that was interesting, and like I don't want to. You can't take everything off the internet because it's like it's just there's so much. You could just talk so much shit and put a video out, and people use that as a reference for something. And
unfortunately.
Right. And it's, like, oh, watch this video. And it's like, I don't, I'm not sure. I don't know. So I always thought that was fascinating because that might explain a lot of things for, with different people. And like, did I inherit my parents? Like my mother dealt with depression. Did I inherit that from her? Because I deal with it.
Right.
And and can it go back? Because like my mom had a pretty wild upbringing. She was sexually assaulted when she was a child.
That's awful.
Right. It is, and it's very common.
I
You know,
know
I
it's
know
really common, unfortunately.
growing up, especially here in Alaska, you know, I had, you know, girls and boys friends. Uh, they felt comfortable enough to divulge private information, and it was, you know, and it's really interesting if it's a guy, because that's the one of the worst things about this country is the stigmatization and the issue with masculinity and toxic masculinity. And so, like, man, we in general we can't deal with issues, not me, but you know, in general,
Mm.
society still is like looked down upon, especially for a guy, um especially you know, a straight guy. And so I always thought that was interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, and also realize that if you're raised, I can't speak specifically about what happened with you, but if you're raised by a depressive mother, that affects how
Yeah.
your connection is. And actually, there's
Right.
a lot about how even within the first year of life, how a baby, how that child connects with their caregiver affects how their
Right.
nervous system uh, kind of develops. If you have a mother who tends to really connect with their child and meets their needs most of the time, you're going to have what we call a very securely attached child. So that child's going to be able to deal with, sometimes things don't always work out for them. Sometimes they're in pain or sometimes they're uncomfortable. But for
Yeah.
most of the time, that gets resolved and they're able to attach with other people in that way. They're able to, they tend to not be anxious or depressed as much, even though it's in all of us.
Right.
But if you have a mother who is very, very anxious, right, extremely anxious, and goes to soothe their child, but they're like freaking out and
Right.
anxious, oh my God, my baby's crying.
The
This
baby
child,
feels it.
yeah, the baby feels it. So the baby gets this weird mixed message of like
Right.
simultaneously being soothed and at the same time being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And they have this sort of anxious style of attachment. And then that sometimes, if it goes unchecked, ends up being that they're the kind of people who, like, if you're married to them and they say, what time are you going to be home? And you're 15 minutes late, they're like, oh my God, I thought something horrible happened to you. No, they're always worried about
Right.
something terrible happening. They tend to be wired more in that fight flight.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes if you have a parent who, and this can happen with a parent who is depressed or just kind of involved with their own thing, they're not that responsive because depression sort of slows us down. So sometimes, a child who's raised like that will just kind of not connect in with their feelings all that much, because when
Right.
they do cry, when they do try to get the mother's attention or the father's attention, their needs aren't met. So it's kind of like they just sort of shut those off a little bit.
Well, isn't it 1 through 5 are like the most important years, because everything, you know, you start everything and
Yeah,
it
but
all
the
begins.
right, the beauty of all of this stuff is that we've learned, like when I was in graduate school, and if somebody had a brain injury, we would say, okay, for the first year after your brain injury, that's when your recovery occurs. After that, not so much, right? And thank God
Mhm.
we've learned that that's actually not true, that the brain changes throughout your whole lifespan. So even if you have this from when you're younger, you can always shift. There's the potential for you to always shift.
Right.
Obviously, if there's a lot of trauma, people have had trauma after trauma after trauma, it's going to be harder to make that shift. And there wasn't any sort of secure connection, right? Because even that secure connection is tend to befriend. That anxious connection is here. The other connection where you don't get your needs met is more like here, right? So the beautiful thing is that it can always shift. It can always shift. And the other thing that's interesting is that, just because somebody goes through something that's really difficult and awful doesn't necessarily make it a trauma. It's really how their body responds to it and how the
Mm.
memory gets processed, which is pretty interesting.
I
So
mean, would that explain, like, I'm not going to go into like news or anything, but would that explain how a lot of these women who were, you know, the Epstein survivors, like how they become, you know, they survived, is that um, they've been able to like I don't know, like they've been physically abused. So you know, a lot of them are really strong, and like and they've had lives. You know, they've been able to, despite that, have a life. So what do you say to that? Like,
It's so variable. It's so variable. So I've even
right,
seen clients of mine who had terrible upbringings, where they were neglected, where they would starve, like they didn't know where they were going to get food from because their parents were not attentive. And then they end up saying at a young age, I can't rely on anybody else. I got to rely on myself, which is not great. I mean, you want people to have a childhood, but they
right.
end up being people that are like, they function like to the highest degree. They take care of their people around them. They do really well, and they're very successful because it's this idea that I can't get comfortable. I have to rely on myself, you know?
So they
But
just teach themselves and heal,
yeah,
like kind of,
that
like
doesn't
kind of,
mean that there's no trauma.
right,
Sometimes they still have the trauma, but one of the
right.
ways that they respond to it is by, you know, just really pushing forward and
Yeah,
really persevering because they've learned they have to do that.
right.
So there's going to be variable reaction, but I'm thinking like I remember hearing a story about a firefighter. He actually was at an EMDR conference that we went to, and he was talking about how he would go and see horrible things in fires, people dying and things like that, but and it
Hello?
was really just one thing that he saw where a girl got caught on a backdraft, and he sort of witnessed it, and that was just like got locked in like a traumatic memory, like his
Right.
his brain and his body did not process it, and that's when he developed PTSD.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it depends.
I mean, that's another thing, is going to a field of work where you witness and physically deal with uh traumatic things, you know, on a regular
Yeah.
basis. Could be day by day, hour by hour, depending on what's going on, and then how do you maintain. I think before you mentioned doctors, and didn't we say that? Like doctors have to maintain because and they're able to because they have so much to deal with, and so much they witness a lot, and then they have to
sometimes
maintain it. Sometimes I
sometimes they
mean,
do.
yeah,
Sometimes they do, and then sometimes they don't. I mean, during the whole thing with the pandemic, I would see a lot of healthcare workers. There are a lot of healthcare workers who were just overwhelmed during the pandemic, because they would see people like dying left and right of them, like they couldn't keep up with it
yeah,
if they like worked in the hospital setting or something like that, and it was just overwhelming for them. And then the fear that they had during the pandemic that they could bring something home early in the pandemic, when we used to like
right,
use Lysol wipes and all of our groceries. Yeah. So these folks would worry they would almost like get to their house, like stop at the front door, get undressed, put all their clothes into some sort of
yeah,
a bath, and then go take a shower because they were afraid they were going to contaminate their family. It was a
right.
pretty overwhelming time. So sometimes, yeah, you know,
It's wild. I'm kind of limited with this app per each episode, so maybe we can end with you mentioned you have also a picture of, I think you did, of Frank Zappa.
yeah.
You like
I have a
Frank
bunch of
Zappa?
those. Yeah. I like a lot of artists. Yeah. I'm not as familiar with his stuff, but yeah, it was a portrait that I did of his.
I mean, is that like you like his music? You like him, or is it just like you found him interesting to look at?
I thought he was more interesting to look at. I know a little bit of his music.
He's the king of obscurity, and
Yeah.
you know, he literally is a genius, and
He
uh,
is.
he is like in the same way Jello Biafra, where he just, you know, and their whole thing is fascinating. Like his his youngest son Dweezil,
Hmm.
I heard an interview, has been trying to get access to his estate so he can do. They do like shows. He has a band where they play his music and
Mhm.
display it. And his mom is like super like he was very emotional talking about because she's just like
Oh,
whatever. It's she's very according to him and all is like just greedy with it and doesn't share
oh,
and it's like and it becomes that rock star family thing where they some family members want to take over the estate for whatever reasons because he's also it's also very lucrative
oh,
you know,
sure.
he's he never was broke so what was I going to say and then Jello he's Dead Kennedys are just I think we talked about how he's just they they were just political but they talked about like um psychosis and just random obscure things that we deal with that
Yeah.
like fair rent and shitty landlords and um depression
Yeah.
being a corporate scientist and having to deal with like just your family like you hate your family you hate yourself kind of thing and what are your thoughts like what do you tell me
About what? There's a lot of
like
things in
Jello
there.
I know like but that was but I mean, what is it like? Did you, how do you listen to Dead Kennedys? Did you used to listen to them, or
Listen to
how'd you
them.
get
I
into
listen
them?
to them. I don't know. From when the time I was a teenager, it was punk rock
You
from
were,
the time I was a
you were a punk,
teenager. So
okay? I
yeah.
knew it. Not many. They're not popular like the Sex Pistols, and
Right.
they were. I mean, even Jello, he sued the band because they wanted to make some money because they're broke. Because when you go into punk rock, it's not a money making. Well, proper punks, you don't make money off shit. It's all, it's about the music. And he refused to let their music be used for anything corporate.
Right.
And now they're all, they've been pissed off at him for like ever. And I kind of agree with him. I just like, you don't always have to sell out. Like just start a new band and go on tour. Like, you
Yeah.
know, it's just leave it alone. But,
I do.
yeah.
I mean,
So yeah,
I appreciate the fact that the thing with things being corporate, I mean, obviously people need to make a living, so you have to
right,
make some money, right? But it's
right,
more so when, and I've been in this position where something corporate basically runs how you're doing everything.
right,
Like you should, if you're an artist, have final say. As David Lynch says, you need to have final cut. You have to have final say in your art, right? So
right,
then when you're working, I guess, for a big label or something, then they get to determine what you're going to do. And that's what the problem is. It's not a surprise that like I end up being in my own practice because I know when I'm in my own practice, I get to practice exactly my way. I don't
right,
have to practice a certain way. I don't have to fulfill certain requirements. I mean, I do. I have to practice and obviously fulfill my ethical requirements and my
right.
state requirements and legal, all that stuff. But I get to practice the way I want to practice.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, um, I want to do this again. I wish we could use the other app because it was like you get more time and it's better quality. But and thank you so much
Absolutely.
for being patient with me and coming
Hey,
back on and
that's fine.
sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
I I appreciate you and I'm interested in that book you told me about.
Which book?
Oh, I think you
Oh,
mentioned two of them. But
I texted it to you I texted it to you.
you did. Okay, I'll look back thoroughly.
That's the Alex Korb, The Upward Spiral.
Right. Okay.
So it's
Sweet.
do we have to get going? I was going to say it talks
No
about
good.
how there's a biology, but not a very specific biology to depression.
Right.
And oftentimes when you start engaging in one aspect of depression, like you kind of stay home more, or you don't connect with
Right.
other people, and then you feel guilty about it. You have negative thoughts, and you really tend to see more of the negative things in your life, and you don't socialize as much, and you don't exercise. That causes a downward spiral with depression. Whereas if you start taking these pieces individually and
Yeah.
shift gears. So you go outside more, you get sunlight, you know.
Right.
I can only imagine what it is to deal with depression in Alaska because for so much
It's
of the year you have no sunlight.
right. Where
Almost
I live,
everybody. Yeah, go ahead.
where I live in the southeast region,
Okay.
so it's not as cold as up north, but it's most of the time it's pretty gray and rainy. It's like
Okay.
north. It's like the north. You know, it's like Washington State and Oregon. It's
Right, right.
it's kind of the same thing, but worse because we're also like we're landlocked. We can't drive anywhere. Like they never built a bridge or anything. We could. We're part of the land, but they never built a bridge. They didn't build a road or anything,
Oh,
and they didn't want to deal with it. So you get, I get cabin fever. I get island. I guess you call it island fever. Where you
island
just the
fever, yeah.
feeling. So, but thanks a lot, Anne, and I hope you have a good night, and I hope you had a good Valentine's Day with your husband.
Thank you. I hope you did too.
We did. We didn't do hardly anything, and we fell asleep early, but it was
We
great.
didn't do anything either. I always think it's amateur night. It's one of those amateur nights, you know, because
Right.
it's like if you've been married for a long time, it's like anniversaries are the big thing, not Valentine's Day, I think.
I love going out doing the thing with you go to a restaurant, but here it's so limited that we've been everywhere, and it's like, really, that's real special. Like been here a fucking million times. Like, all right.
Yeah, but
So
sometimes those are the best places, the one that you know and you like them, and that's it. I'll end up going to like the same place over and over again.
we don't have that either, though. I don't have like
Yeah.
a favorite restaurant, so that's the other issue. So anyway, thank you, Ann. You
All
have a
right,
good
take
night.
it
Take
easy.
care. Okay.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.